Getting started with our CARS routine today, we're going to start at the top with cervical spine. Start by creating some full body tension, or what we know as a radiation. Shift the chin back, drop it down to chest. We're going to trace to the left, so follow the collarbone. From there, we're going to drive the left ear down to the left shoulder while holding rotation. Go back up into extension while holding that same rotation, so lift the chin. From there, we'll rotate to the opposite side, so rotate to the right, drop the right ear to the right shoulder. Chin comes down to collarbone, and then we're going to trace back to center. From there, we'll reset, start from the top, shift back, bring the chin down to collarbone or chest again. Trace the chin across the collarbone to the right side. Once we've rotated as much as possible, drop the right ear to the right shoulder, extend the chin up while holding that right side rotation. From there, we'll switch rotation and extension to the left. Once you've rotated maximally in extension, drop the left ear to the left shoulder, and then start to bring the chin back down to the collarbone and trace back to center. Again, reset into the top position. Remembering here, we don't want to go into any painful positions, so we'll begin again. So chin down to chest, full body tension, trace across to the left side, drop the left ear to the left shoulder, lift the chin up, rotate in extension to the right side, drop the right ear to the right shoulder, bringing the chin back down to collarbone, finding yourself at center again, and then all the way up. We'll do another rep to the right side, so shift back like you're trying to make a double chin, chin down to collarbone, trace over, drop the ear, extend up, make sure that we're not shrugging the shoulders up towards the ears, rotating over to the left side, left ear down to left shoulder, chin comes back down to collarbone, and done. For thoracic spine CARS, we're going to come to a standing position with a wide base. If you need, we can put something behind the hips to help stabilize. From there, it's very similar to cervical spine. We're going to use the elbows as the same cues that we use for the chin through cervical CARS. From this position, full body tension, we're going to bring the elbows down, pulling the ribs in and the belly in. We're going to rotate to the left side without letting the hip move. From there, we're going to drop the left shoulder down to the left hip. From there, again, we're going to extend while holding that rotation. Holding that extension, we're going to rotate over to the right side, drop the right shoulder to the right hip, and then start to flex forward through the spine. Coming all the way up at the end of this rep, we're going to reset, go back the other direction. Full body tension, pull the elbows down into the belly. We're going to rotate to our right side. Make sure there's no lateral flexion until now. We'll drop the right shoulder to the right hip. Holding that flexion, start to extend through rotation, switch to the other side. Now drop the left shoulder to the left hip, and then flex forward through the spine and trace back to center. Another variation that we can utilize for thoracic CARS that'll take away some compensation through the lower extremities is by sitting on a ball or in a kneeling position. Cues from here are the exact same. We're going to think about squeezing that ball and creating full body tension. Again, pulling the ribs in and the elbows down, we're going to rotate to the right. From there, we'll drop the right shoulder to the right hip, extending up through thoracic spine. We're going to rotate over to the opposite side, lateral flexion to the left side, so left shoulder to left hip, and then rolling forward into flexion again. Up tall and reset the rep. Again, we're going to bring the elbows down, rotate to the left, lateral flexion to the left, extension, switching over to right side rotation through that extension. The right shoulder drives down to the right hip through lateral flexion, and then elbows forward and back to our starting position. Again, up nice and tall. Another rep to the right side, so rotate first, lateral flexion, extension, making sure we're not moving into any painful areas here. Rotating over to the opposite side, touching the left shoulder down to the left hip, and then flexing forward. And back to start. Moving into scapula and or shoulders, shoulder blades. From here, we're going to create a radiation. Using the hands to visualize what the shoulder's doing. We're going to move into protraction first, elevate up to the ears, pinch the shoulders back, drop them down, and then reset back to protraction. So again, full body tension, shoulders to ears, hold them up, pinch them back, hold back, draw them down to your back pockets, and then punch forward. So as we go through this, just visualize trying to make the biggest circle possible with the shoulder blade. From there, we'll switch directions, elevate, protract, drop down, retract, elevate, protract, depress again, retract, elevate. And big thing, keep an eye on what the rib cage is doing. It's very common that it will flare up to compensate for the scapula. From there, we'll take a different view. So standing to the side, visualize trying to draw, again, the biggest circle you can from the side view of the shoulder blade. So pull the ribs in. From there, we'll protract, elevate, retract, depress, begin again. So rib cage tucked in, protract, elevate, pull them back, drop them into your back pockets, reverse direction, forward, down, back, up, protract, depress, retract, and elevate. From a rear view as well, we can see here again. So remember that as we go through this, we're trying to couple all these motions together. So as she elevates, she's going to hold protraction and then elevate into retraction and moving through. So elevate, retract, depress, protract, and then reverse, depress, retract, elevate up to the ears, protract, drop them down, and back. Another variation that we'll often use here is from quadruped. So on hands and knees, we're going to have the wrist right under the shoulders, the knees right under the hip. Keeping some tension in the belly, we're going to move through the same thing. So this can help leverage us into easier positions. So retract, depress, protract, and elevate. Okay, so elevate, retract, depress, protract, holding all these together, elevate up again, pinch them back, drive them to the back pockets, push the ground away. A couple more reps here. We'll switch directions. So depress, retract, elevate, protract, push the ground away, depress again. Keep moving. So again, drawing the biggest circle possible with the shoulder blade. From there, we can stay in quadruped and work through something called cat-camel segmentation. So another form of spine cars working more so through a linear pathway. What we're going to do is try to create segmentation through the spine, meaning that we want to treat each of these joints as if they can move individually of each other. So first, moving up into flexion, we're going to try to get as much as we can out of each of these vertebral junctions in order to maximize the amount of range we're getting out of the spine. So as we go up into flexion, we're trying to tuck the hip, pull the belly in, and push the ground away, drive the chin down, and arch that back as much as possible towards the roof. So trying to get a nice gradual flexion, amount of flexion through the spine here. Once we hit end range, we're going to drive the hands away from the knees away from the hands, and then we're going to try to pull the rib cage up to the roof as much as possible, making sure we're not losing tension through the hips. From there, we're going to move next into extension. So segmenting from the lower portion first, starting at the hip. Lift the toes, just start to roll the hip forward and move into extension through the entire spine. So lumbar, thoracic, mid-back, and then trying to lift the chest up actively, and then following through with the chin here as well. So trying to get as much arch through the entire spine as possible. And then once we hit end range here, vice versa from flexion, instead of driving away, we're going to try to squeeze the hands towards the knees towards the hands, and then we're going to drive the rib cage down towards the ground, lifting the chin up as much as possible, and finding max extension through the spine and feeling all the muscles alongside the spine contracting to give us this extension. From there, we're going to move into segmentation back to flexion. So remember, we're trying to only move certain junctions of the spine, so keep the head up, start at the hip, and start to roll into flexion. From lumbar, we'll move into thoracic, pulling the rib cage as high to the roof, and then not moving into the neck until we pass through thoracic. So we'll drop the chin, and then again a good end range contraction, driving the hands away from knees away from hands, pulling the ribs up and driving as hard as possible. Moving into our extension again, we're going to segment slowly from the hip, keeping the chin down, and then slowly moving into extension from the bottom, working our way up. A cue that we'll use is soft elbow, and think about actively picking the chest up in order to find that tension in between the shoulder blades to actively focus on thoracic extension. Head's nice and tall, trying to telescope through there. We're not just compressing into the back of the neck. Trying to really compress, make sure there's no broken areas of tension throughout the spine. Holding end range contraction. We're going to start another rep into flexion from the chin. So drop the chin, move through thoracic spine as we try to push up to the roof. And then again, segmenting into spinal flexion, moving now into the lumbar, tucking the hips under, utilizing the glutes and the muscles in the pelvis to try to get us as much lumbar flexion as possible. The ribs come up to the roof, holding and range contraction again, and then moving into extension segmentally from the top now, so extending through cervical and then through thoracic spine, and slowly moving down into lumbar spine extension here. Remember to keep the head up nice and tall, telescope through the head, not compressing in the back of the neck, finding that end range tension, holding, compressing as long as there's no pain. Nice and tall through there, finding good connection through thoracic spine in between the shoulder blades, and relax. Back up to our feet, we're going to get started with shoulder cars. In shoulder cars, we're going to landmark the collarbone, and the reason being, if the collarbone moves, that tells us that the scapula is compensating for something the shoulder is supposed to be doing. So from here, finger on the collarbone, we're going to start by externally rotating at the shoulder, keeping the arm nice and straight, coming across the body up into flexion while holding external rotation. Hit your top position of max flexion, and from there we're going to switch to internal rotation. So turn the thumb down and maximize as much internal rotation as we move back into shoulder extension. So where we should end is with the hand, the back of the hand at the hip. From there we'll reverse out, holding internal, up into flexion, switch to external rotation, bring the hand across and down. A couple more cues in a different view here. We're going to lock that scapula down, keeping that arm locked out. The arm's going to come across the body. Again, making sure the rib cage doesn't flare. We're going to hit as much flexion through the shoulder, switching to as much internal rotation at the top as we begin to extend, and always fighting for more rotation as we go through this. So again, the hand ends up internally rotated at the bottom, hit as much extension, externally rotate out as you come back into your overhead position, bringing the foot across, and back down to the start. Going to the other side now, we're going to again landmark the collarbone, bring the hand across, make sure that we're not shrugging the shoulder towards the ear, as much flexion as possible to your overhead position, switch to internal rotation as you begin extension on the right side here. The back of the hand ends up at the hip, we go reverse, trying to keep the arm midline. As we come across into flexion, we're going to switch rotation down and through. So if we take a side view, what we're looking for here is that we're drawing the biggest circle possible at the hand with the motion coming from the shoulder. So make sure that we're not rotating through the torso and everything's staying nice and stationary. So again, max flexion, switching rotation to internal as we go into extension. Keeping that hand as high off the ground as possible until we hit the hip. Reverse direction, externally rotate out of your roadblock there, full overhead position, across, back down. From there we can also do both arms at the same time, and this is going to help us not rotate as much. Make sure to keep an eye on the scapula. So from here, both arms come up into as much flexion. Once we've hit that, we're going to switch to internal rotation as we focus on extension. Meeting the back of the hand at the hip again. From here we'll go reverse, so internal extension, externally rotating out in order to get our flexed position through the shoulder. Overhead position, holding external rotation, coming back down towards the hip. Another variation here, we can go again to a kneeling position. This is just going to be there to help block away some of those compensations again. So working on the right side, we're going to come into external rotation at the bottom. Okay, keeping the hips heavy, we're going to come forward, up into flexion while holding external rotation. Keeping the spine nice and flat here and nice and neutral. From there, we'll switch to internal as we begin to go into shoulder extension. Same position, back of the hand ends up at the hip, we'll reverse direction, up through extension, externally rotating out, locking that shoulder down as we move into flexion, down and across. Another rep here. So again, we're making sure that the spine isn't doing too much compensation for the shoulder, and moving through nice and slow Again, making sure there's no pain in any of these positions. If there's pain, just go ahead and limit your range of motion to where you don't feel any pain through here. Coming back to our feet, we're going to work on hip cars. From here, we suggest getting a dowel or a broomstick or something just to help with a little bit of stabilization. From the standing position, again, full body tension, we're going to start with external rotation and hip flexion. So bringing the foot across and up to the chest as high as possible. From there, we're going to open up the hip, hold the knee high, try to move into internal rotation without letting the knee drop. From there, back to extension, finding tension through the glute, and then bringing the knee back down to the other leg there. From the reverse, we'll go into extension first, keeping 90 degrees through the leg. Coming up into abduction, holding the knee high, switching to internal rotation, and then switching from there to external and flexion. Okay, so again, we're going to drive the knee up to the chest as much as possible without letting it drift away from midline. Open through the hip, keep the knee high. Try to rotate the heel up towards the ear. Drive back without letting the knee drop and finding glute tension. And then bringing that knee back down to midline with the other knee there. Reverse rep, making sure again belly stays tight. There's no compensation happening through the lower back or a tilt of the pelvis. Finishing up our second rep on the right side here. We'll do the same thing on the left side. So nice wide hand position. Big deep breath, keep the belly tight. Lead the knee up, holding as much external rotation as we do so. Opening up the hip there, keeping the knee nice and high. Switching into internal rotation. Driving the knee back into hip extension, finding glute tension, and then the knee matches down to the other again. From there, create a radiation, drive back into glute tension or hip extension. Knee and foot come up to the side as much as possible. And then from there, we're going to drive the knee to the chest, bring it back across and all the way down. Biggest thing to keep an eye on here is the pelvis. It will shift a lot if there's a lot of compensations happening. So opening up, rotating, finding internal rotation, really making sure here to keep the belly tight. The lower back is very good at compensating for hip extension. So as you move into hip extension, feel the glute tension instead of lower back. Knee and foot come out to the side. Knee up to chest, over across back to midline and down. Another variation we've got for hip cars are side lying hip cars. So get on the ground on either side, and what we're going to do is get a nice straight line and stack the hips and shoulders. Helps to have a counterbalance in front. So from there, we're going to lift knee to chest. Same thing, open up through the hip, keep the knee nice and high, try to rotate the heel towards that ear. Driving back into hip extension, finding glute tension, and then bringing the knee back down to center. From there, we'll drive back again into hip extension, keep the belly tight as to not go into the lower back. Abduct the knee, holding internal rotation, bringing it over and across, and then back down to our starting point. So again, belly's tight, lead the knee up to chest, open through the hip as much as possible, keep the knee high, rotate into internal rotation, hold internal, get back into hip extension, bring the knee back to center, and begin your reverse rep. So driving back into the glute, knee comes up to the shoulder, knee to chest, back down to midline, and back down to our starting position. The third variation we've got for hip cars is against a wall. So exact same thing, except posting the hand up and keeping a nice straight position. So up into flexion, holding external rotation, open up through the hip, keep the knee high, rotate into internal, back to starting position, going through a reverse rep, trying to keep the hips in a stationary position as far as distance away from the wall. So again, external rotation, up into flexion, open through the hip, keep the knee high, try to rotate internally, and then from here driving back into hip extension, finding glute tension through here, matching the knees back together. Beginning our reverse rep, hip extension, abduction, knee stays high, drive it up towards the chest, bring the foot across and into as much external rotation as possible, and then back down. We're going to work through some wrist cars next, so what we're going to do, one at a time, we're going to grab the forearm and face the palm to the roof. From here, we're going to keep the hand nice and straight, moving the hand across, flexing it up, rotating to the opposite side, and then extending the hand back. Moving through here, thinking that we're trying to draw the biggest circle with our fingertips without letting our hand position change. So trying to go through full range of the wrist, nice and slow, finding all the tissue through there, contracting as much as possible, and then making sure that the elbow isn't rotating to compensate. So go 3 to 5 rotations per side here. We can go to the other side. So hand comes across, extends back, over to the outside, flex up and around. So again, the hand stays nice and flat through here. Try not to let the elbow rotate or the shoulder move. Nice slow rotations using the fingertips as a point to trace through. Reverse direction, do a couple slow ones to the other side. Really slowing down through sticky spots here, making sure that we're maintaining proper control. From there, we'll move into elbow cars. So we're going to do both at the same time. So pin the elbow to the torso. We're going to start by supinating or rotating, flexing up, switching rotation, and then coming down. So remember, as we go through this, we're trying to fight for as much rotation as possible. So from there, supinate again, coming down. On the way up, supinate, switch to pronation, turn the thumbs in, come down again, hold pronation, coming up, rotating out, back down. Moving into knee cars, we're going to get the foot right under the knee in a seated position and establish some rotation first of all. So without moving the knee side to side, we're just going to plant that heel and rotate externally and then internally through the knee. So on the back side of the knee, there's 2 tendons leading into it that you should feel contracting as you move through internal and external rotation. So do a few rotations back and forth here, making sure that it's not just the ankle doing that movement. And actually feel the knee and see if you can feel that rotation. Once we've established that, we'll go ahead and we're going to pick the knee or the foot up off the ground. And while holding that rotation, we're going to extend that leg out, switch to internal rotation, and then hold internal and flex the knee in. So going through this, extend, bringing it back in, flex internal rotation, hold it, or switch to external, extend out again, switch to internal, pull the heel back towards the butt, hold internal, we'll go out into extension, rotate to external rotation and flex through the knee again, holding external, coming out again, and back in. So make sure we go through each of these about 3 to 5 times. From there, we'll switch to the other side. So first, establish the rotation again. So plant the heel, rotate externally and internally a few times just to make sure you can grasp what the knee's doing through rotation. Once you've got the hang of that rotation, again, we can lift the heel up off the ground and add in the flexion and extension here as well. So external rotation, flexing the knee in, switching rotation, coming out, remembering here that if the leg is locked out, the knee will not rotate. So if you're looking to switch rotation at the end, just unbuckle the knee and then rotate and continue on. For ankle cars, we're going to prop the leg up on something in order to make sure we can get full range through that ankle. A key here is making sure the leg stays locked out. As I said before, if the knee is locked out, the knee cannot rotate. So without letting the knee move side to side or rotate there, let's just draw the biggest circle possible with the big toe nice and slow. So pointing the toe as much as possible, bringing it across, and then flexing up through the ankle, over to the other side, moving through, again drawing the biggest circle possible with the big toe. We'll switch directions, go the opposite. Again, nice and easy, making sure there's no rotation happening at the hip. If the leg is locked out, you should be able to look at the knee to make sure there's no rotation happening there. So isolating to the ankle. We'll switch over to the other side. Same thing, lock the leg out. Nice big rotations through the entire ankle here, trying to maximize range of motion through the entire car here. So pulling up, across, pointing through. We'll do a few reps here, and then we'll switch direction. Good. And back the other way. So nice and slow, Again, drawing the biggest circle possible, contracting hard into each of those tissues in order to gain the biggest range of motion here. Moving next into patellar cars. Patella is not an active joint, so we're going to self-mobilize this with the fingers. So what we're going to do is try to relax the leg as much as possible to make sure there's no tension in the thigh. All we're going to do is we're going to utilize the thumb to basically trace the kneecap in circles here. So pressing on the top, we're going to roll to the side, push it over, push it up towards the top. We're essentially just drawing circles around the patella to try to tell that tissue to relax a little bit as we go through these ranges. So nice slow circles, trying to push that kneecap into each of those positions. So we should get a good amount of global movement from that kneecap as we put pressure into it. Again, we're not going to get any movement or mobilization here if the quad is tight, so relax through the muscle there and work through these positions as best as you can. So light pressure. If you feel some tension, feel free to kind of hold that position for a minute or two to relax that tension and then continue on. Lastly, we've got our feet. So with these, this is going to be something that a lot of us might struggle with, but do your best to move through these motions. So keeping the 4 toes down, we're going to try to lift the big toe, and then the alternate to that is keeping the big toe down. Can you lift and spread the other 4 toes? So all we need to be doing for this on a daily basis is seeing how much control we have over the toes individually. So working through this as best as possible. Again, lift the big toes, peel all the other ones up, and just work on individual control of each of those toes, as well as trying to spread those toes as much as possible. So keep moving through, playing around with the amount of control you have. And with that, we conclude our CARS routine.